All right, so welcome everybody to the final meeting of the Informational Advisory Committee for the 2022 Petaluma Fairgrounds Advisory Panel process. Really nice to see you all again. As I mentioned before we started the live stream, just know a few folks either couldn't make it today, who we're following up with offline, and a couple of folks just might be late. But basically this meeting is kind of our capstone to tell you a little bit about what happened in the panel process, answer any questions you might have, and then debrief the panel process or the Informational Advisory Committee's process with you all. We're really always trying to make improvements to how information gets into processes like this, and are just incredibly grateful in advance to tell you a little bit about what happened in the panel process. Sorry, and incredibly grateful for your feedback on how this went for you and how could it be improved in the future. So I'll be kind of loosely guiding us today, facilitating us. Lynn's going to be taking notes. And yeah, we wanted to, I see there's a little something in the chat. Let me just see what that is. Oh, perfect, the storytelling gallery. Thank you. So first, we just wanted to start out by giving you a little overview of the panel process. It's been a couple months since we've seen many of you, and I know I've touched base with many of you throughout the last couple months. But just as a short summary here, and then we'll open it up for questions. Lynn, would you be up for giving that overview, how things have gone?
Yeah, totally. So hi everyone, by the way, it's really nice to see you again. Thanks for coming back. 2 months after, a month and a half after we've last seen you. And yeah, so just a little update. I think the last time we met was after the first weekend of the process in May. So there's been a lot that's happened since then. We've been down in Petaluma 4 other times. And then as you may remember, that first weekend was all about sort of the information that you all had prepared for the panel. 13 speakers or so, I want to say, unless I have 16, I forget, some number around there, the speakers that you had identified. And then the panel also got its first look at the menu that you had prepared of potential speakers and debriefed what they were hearing. They read the sort of statements that came from the city and the fair, and your statements as well, and heard from a number of you in person as well. So that was sort of the first weekend. Then on June 4th, the panel came back together for just one day to do sort of a special activity. Well, the morning of that day was their tour of the fairgrounds. And then the afternoon of that day, well, there were a couple speakers on the day, I believe, as well. And then the afternoon was the community exchange, which I think a couple of you were at as well, which was great. The panel hosted about 50 members of the community and did sort of several rounds of World Cafe style public engagement exercise and took lots of notes. And there was also a graphic recorder there that produced this beautiful sort of artwork after the report back from all those different groups, those sort of groups that shuffled, so the panelists got to hear from a number of different folks. And then the panel came back in the middle of June and, well, came back at least virtually. Unfortunately, the main thing was a couple of us on staff were out with COVID or had a family member out with COVID. And so weren't able to make the process happen in person that weekend, although Alex and our colleague Casey were there in person. So we moved the whole process online for one weekend, which was quite an effort, as you can imagine. But we did it, and we only lost about a day's worth of content that weekend, or time, I should say, that weekend, or from the process in general. We just shifted things around. That weekend was still presenters coming in, but also the panel starting to move into deliberating a bit on its principles by the end of that weekend. But it was still mostly information gathering at that stage, though the information then was from folks that mostly the panel had selected off of the menu that you gave them. So then the panel came back in person July 2nd, and another sort of single day event where the panel was working on its principles, so putting together its sort of these kind of high-level values, editing, refining, combining these things. That's what it did for most of that day. And so at the end of July 2nd, there was a report that went to council with the packet for that July 11th meeting later on. So the first report was done on July 2nd, and then the panel came back a week later. Still a little bit of information coming in now, sort of responsive information to some extent. There was an equity-based survey with some community groups. There was information from stakeholder groups, maybe some of the groups that you were part of, submitted sort of options, site options, sort of more specific recommendations to the panel with rationales. But the panel really, I should say, really moved into the deliberative phase, putting together, working on these different kind of more specific site options based on their principles, and then starting to put those site options together, outlining sort of their personal visions for the site, into group visions, into, you know, what are the different options within those visions, and that's kind of where the final report ended up with. So, well, I should say the final sort of, or not, I shouldn't say final either, because it's actually still ongoing. The panel will still be producing more specifics about its recommendations, although the vast majority of the panel's work is complete with these series of reports. The first one being these high-level principles, the second one being these 120 some different options, each of those ranked and prioritized, and then this final report with sort of more overarching kind of visions assembling the values and options together into more cohesive visions of the site. Not the end of the road by any means, but sort of what the panel feels like are sort of the main kind of directions that the city could go, the city and Fair Board could go in terms of utilizing the site in the future. So I think anything else that I should cover, Alex, or we should cover?
I think that's a great overview of the process, and I don't want to take too much time on that, but I guess I will just briefly add that that the panel's work will continue, as Lynn pointed out, over the summer. We've baked in these 15 hours, which then, because of the 8 hours we lost in June, has become essentially 24 hours that panelists can now use to continue engaging with decision makers and with the broader community about their recommendations. So the kind of fundamental content of those reports won't change, but there are now 4 subcommittees that will continue engaging on 4 different topic areas. So there's an evaluation committee that's more working on evaluating the process, a policy impact committee that's really working to meet with stakeholder groups and decision makers to ensure some policy impact. Process committee, it's a group that might kind of do some of that charrette style design work that adds just additional layers or visualization detail to the final report. And the public outreach committee will be doing other community presentations and kind of communications work. So that's the format that their ongoing work will take. I think that's the only piece that I have to add. Yeah. So yeah, open to questions. I'll take hands in order, or just kind of conversation is very welcome too. I think this is more a meeting for you all to have some conversation, since we haven't spoken in a little while. But let's go to Anne.
Thanks. Yeah, I was curious if the idea that some of the panelists would continue work after this process was formally concluded, was that initially envisioned, or is that something that just kind of spontaneously evolved?
That was baked into the process design. So it's always been I think a shortcoming of other processes we've done where the panel hands over its final recommendations and then the political process ensues and they aren't really supported to stay engaged. And so often we don't see the kind of impact, the kind of involvement, that it really takes to follow those recommendations all the way through the decision-making process. That would be ideal and actually, position their recommendations well on an ongoing basis. So we designed that very specifically to help improve that piece of this project. And
that's great.
Yeah, they're really owning it. They're really excited to continue and in it for the long haul.
That's really wonderful.
Yeah. Leave a little bit of a pause, just if anyone else has questions or comments. Great.
I have a question. So when does all of this go to the final decision makers? And we start to hear some, I guess, more concrete stuff they want to do?
Yeah, so the panel presented to, I guess that's a detail we forgot to say explicitly. The panel presented to the City Council on the final day of their process, so on July 11th, that evening. And then they presented to the Fair Board last Wednesday, so July 20th at their monthly meeting. And then essentially decision makers are collecting information for the rest of the summer. And then at least for council, the next kind of decision point is in October. They'll have a work session on this where they kind of look at all of the different outputs from community engagement, including this panel and other work the city is doing. And have some action steps that come out of that meeting is my understanding. Yeah, you're welcome. Diana.
Yeah, I just had a clarification question. I didn't get to spend too much time looking at the final report that the panel presented to the council, but I had a question about the visions. The visions were numbered, and 1/5/6. It wasn't clear to me what those numbers meant.
Do you want to speak to that, Lynn?
Sure. Yeah, this was a little bit of a confusing thing in here. We didn't want to number them 1, 2, and 3 necessarily because there was a lot of granularity within each of those visions. So although they are in order in the report in terms of their overall support from the panel, the one with the most overall support coming first, we felt a little bit weird about calling them Vision 1, Vision 2, Vision 3. So instead, we used the group numbers, sort of the in-process group numbers that they came out of to identify them. Downside of that being, it's confusing. So that one that's labeled 153 or 156 came out of combined ideas from groups 1, 5, and 6 within the process that day. So those numbers are meaningless, essentially. They're just a way to identify them.
Okay, so they just could be A, B, and C.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly, yeah. We just didn't want to show them as sort of being really hierarchical, I guess, because they all had quite a bit of support, and within each of them, as you can see, there were separate votes on sort of the components of them. So yeah, but yes, they could just be called A, B, and C or whatever.
Okay. This is an overall question, so I can wait till later to ask it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and if there aren't kind of more questions at this stage, very happy to dive straight into debriefing, and also if there are questions that come up along the way in that process, we can take a moment. But I'll give just one more gap here, a bit of silence to see if anyone else has additional thoughts, and otherwise, maybe Lynn, you could pull up our notes document.
They're ready.
Okay, wonderful. Well, let's move into a debrief then. So we typically structure debriefs in kind of two sections. First, just positives, what worked well. So debriefing the process that this IAC went through over your seven meetings back in April and May, what worked well, and we'll take a moment and just try to focus on positives in that first section, and then move into deltas, or what could be changed, what could be improved, what should we do differently next time. And thank you, Lynn, for taking some notes, and just go through raised hands, or if there's a silence, just feel free to hop in if there isn't a long queue. So first, what went, and I realize this also takes some reaching back in our memories by a few months, so thanks. But what worked well about this committee's process for information gathering? Yeah, Kim, go ahead.
So I think that some of the portions that worked well was the time. So sort of the expectation was laid out, and we knew what we were supposed to be doing, and we were able to do that, but a timeline for how or when we were supposed to have those things completed, I'm not sure that was very clear throughout the process. I think we knew what our role was. I don't think that it was communicated to us, the timeline for gathering that information from the people in our stakeholder groups that we could work with to get that information. So from that perspective, the idea of it and the process of gathering information was useful, but without clearly stated firm deadlines for what that looked like, it was a little bit harder to get responses from some of the stakeholder group members or people in the community that fit that definition of what our stakeholder groups were. And then the website that was created for the process and the committee and what was happening with Healthy Democracy's role in this process was nice. I think some people accessed that, but only some. And perhaps a social media presence by Healthy Democracy, creating a page that is specific to whatever project Healthy Democracy is working on, puts it frankly in people's faces, because we are on social media all the time. I know grandparents of students who are Facebook phenoms. They are on Instagram. They're all people who are not going to go to a website. It's not immediate enough. The need is not met quick enough for them to respond in a timely manner. So changing the way that those things are communicated to a community or to interested parties in whatever project is happening, I think is important. And I would say that in this specific instance, at least from some of the cynics in my particular stakeholder group and parts of the community, it really contributed to this feeling of a lack of transparency. So I'm sure you've seen comments, and I'm sure you've heard from people who use rhetoric like, it was really hard for me to find this. They must not want us to know about this happening, and they're trying to keep it secret, or whatever the comments are. There was a lot of, with specific factions, a little hostility around them, how information was put out there for their participation in the process process. Once we could speak to them on one-on-one, their thoughts and views changed, but we have a very suspicious group within our community that does not feel that, and has created, frankly, a lot of tension between the council and this process, because as always, squeaky wheels get greased. So we have a particular faction that's super squeaky and pointing fingers and whatever, and the council and specific council members trying to work to be middle ground and see the balance of the issue are often drowned out by that. So getting in front of that and eliminating the feeling, doing everything possible to eliminate those feelings about a lack of transparency, should you do a project like this again, I think would be super important. Super important.
Great. Thanks, Kim. Yeah, appreciate a little combination of positives and deltas there. That's fine. We don't have to necessarily go in order. Maybe I'll just invite some any other positives, things that worked well.
I think that one of the positives was it was really clear that sort of bring it on, bring on whatever your ideas, viewpoints, information sources. I think that openness to hear whatever people thought needed to be heard was really good. And I thought generally the dialogue among the committee was good, or panel, council, I can't remember what, informational advisory
committee.
Okay. Yeah, I thought that dialogue generally worked quite well. That, I think as a group we were respectful of one another and open to hearing what was said. So that was a real positive. And it was great that it was a cross section. I mean, it's like, I don't know that, I think I might have met one or two people before. And so it was a great opportunity to get that sense of the wider community for me.
Thanks, Anne.
I did enjoy, meeting different people, even though it was on Zoom. And I think people came in with their own viewpoints, and after listening to each other, we each kind of gained a different respect for the people on this committee. So that was very helpful. One thing I saw is, just that affected me, I think, was the time limits. Like, you guys had an agenda and that's what we were going to do in that time limit. And there wasn't much flexibility, it didn't seem like. And so I think if this is a new process for you, thinking that, oh, maybe that's going to take more time, we can push it to the next time, or, just giving us more time to talk, because it felt like some of those sessions I think at the very beginning, more so than at the end, we were rushed for time because that's what the agenda said we were going to do in that amount of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's super helpful, just to note what Katie just pointed out there, like, yeah, more time for this in the first few meetings, less important in the last few. Like, that kind of detail is incredibly helpful for us as we redesign and evolve the process. So thanks, Katie.
I thought the IAC did a really fine job of bringing in information from really widespread diversity of community members, and people seem to really be able to use their existing networks and people they knew in the community to put forward a really robust list of potential speakers. I was really impressed by that, and I thought that worked really well. I thought on the pluses and minuses, two sides of the same coin, working on Zoom felt, really good and very convenient for everybody to be able to participate easily. But I did miss not having an IAC in person
Mhm.
meeting, it would be really nice to meet people in person. So maybe next time. I thought that you guys did a good job learning as you went along what the challenges were, like the, not being able to get into the Gmail, into the Google documents, and you needing to have the right email permissions, and creating each individual's lists on the Google Docs. Those were things where you guys did a lot of learning on the fly, and it was appreciated that you were able to adjust and correct, mid-process in that way.
Thanks. Let's see, we haven't yet heard from Hector or Alana in this piece. Anything to add here, either of you?
Well, I could say it was the first time I was ever involved in something like this. So at times it was a little intimidating, but I think overall I got a really positive experience out of it all. And I thought you guys did great.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. It's a little loud over here. I have my roommates who are 5 and 6 making lots of noise over here. So yeah, the biggest takeaway for me was just this civic engagement that this process brought about just within our cohort here. But it definitely had rippled out into our community from even just the folks that were here. So it's really exciting to see. I got word that there's some folks maybe from the panel that might be running for city council, some things like that. So that really gets me excited, and I'm grateful for that. So thank you.
Great. I know folks have already kind of started sharing deltas, which is great, but maybe let's explicitly move on to that piece and welcome any and all kind of suggestions for improvement. What was challenging? What could happen differently next time? The floor is open. Feel free to just hop in.
One thing, and I had shared this with Alex previously, it would have been nice to receive that report that went to the city council before, since it was released to some of the public and not all of the public, and discussions were happening before the city council meeting, that, we did put a lot of work into this and trying to, we attended all these meetings and worked together. I think that would have been nice, rather than hear it from somebody who was very negative about it, and putting one of the sides down in a public meeting before the city council meeting even happened. So, and then when they asked me about it, knowing I was on that committee, I had nothing to say because I hadn't seen the report. So, I would just say, if you're going to share that information, maybe share it with all of those that participated.
One thing that I found challenging was fairly early in the process. When we were assembling the ideas about, who should be, presenting information to the panel, it wasn't really clear if we were proposing people or content. And so we ended up with a dozen different people with a huge overlap of content. Whereas I felt like it would have been a lot easier to just look at the content ideas first and then try and identify the best presenters on the respective content. So that part to me was kind of messy. That it felt like it took longer than it needed to and was messier than it needed to. Whereas if we had, all said, yeah, we definitely need somebody to speak to, sort of the fairgrounds history and what goes on there, sure, but like we probably didn't need like 18, you know, nominated representatives that we had to consider each one individually. Like, I don't know who these people are. I was in no way qualified to like vote on them really as people to speak to that subject matter. So that part was frustrating. And let's see if I had some other thoughts. Somebody else go though, and I'll see if I retrieve my other thought.
Something that came to mind is that some of the folks in my stakeholder group felt there was a lack of transparency on how the representative for the IAC was chosen among the people who put their names forward. And then I benefited because several people reached out, I think to you, Alex, and then you connected them to me from the stakeholder group. But otherwise, it really wasn't apparent to the degree to which and the mechanisms for communicating with our stakeholder groups. You know, what were the expectations there? What were the strategies that were available? So a little more transparency and structure around that might have benefited the whole process. And I think, you know, along the lines of what Kim, you mentioned, transparency does a lot to diminish people's suspicions. And because this is such an emotional issue for so many people in the community, you know, bending over backwards is probably what is the best thing to do.
Yeah, I would actually agree with that. Oh, sorry for jumping in, Kim. On the other side of things, I knew most of my stakeholder groups pretty well, and it was relatively easy for me theoretically. But even so, I would say for me, one of the bigger challenges was I really didn't know what in advance, what input I should be asking them for. And so I ended up with like 0 lead time, and therefore I didn't have a really great opportunity to mine those sources, even though I knew who they were and they knew that I had been, you know, pulled out of the hat. So yeah, some lead time on between the time you're appointed and the first time we met to sort of say, okay, great, now you're it, now go gather input from your people would have been really helpful, you know, like 2 to 3 weeks at least, instead of, I think we had 1, and that was sort of like, whoa, that's really hard.
Yeah, Kim.
So I think from my stakeholder group, there has long been talk about the future of the fairgrounds. And I felt as if part of my role, even though it wasn't stated, was almost to calm the crowd, to sort of repair a little bit of, I don't want to say damage, but just relationships really, and to get people to be focused on a productive conversation versus an adversarial conversation. And that was hard because, again, lead time was short. The reasonable, rational thinking members, interested parties who understand both sides are, you know, those are the people we want to contribute. And those are the people that don't have the time really to contribute. So as Anne said, a little bit more time to understand what input to seek and to be able to schedule conversations with folks about the process and the issue itself would have been helpful. Because, you know, a lot of times I'm looking at conversation in the wind tunnel that is social media, and I'm just like, oh, you know, it's so hard, you know, and again, spending a lot of time sort of calming people down or just ignoring them entirely, which I don't think is right either, but often happened because I'm not interested in the vitriol, frankly.
Thanks.
I can just jump in quickly. I think I agree with everything that's been said and appreciate everyone highlighting those things. For me, yeah, I felt a little NBOP was kind of brought in a little bit late to the game. So from day one, it just felt a little bit chaotic for me to try to get caught up and really drop into the role. So I don't know how that could be rectified in the future. But yeah, that was definitely a holdup from us over here.
See if we've hit a little pause. I do have one specific question. Y'all are kind of talking about this representative role and communication with others in your stakeholder categories. And this is the first time that we've done selection for the IAC via democratic lottery. As you know, previously it had been via nomination from the city. And I'm curious, after having gone through this process, what you all think. Our intention in designing it that way was to eliminate some of the political bias that comes along with hand selection. And yeah, very curious if you think it had that intended effect, or how you would design this in the future, whether lottery selection for the IAC was a good move or maybe some other model.
Hi all, I have to jump. So thanks so much and enjoyed working with you all.
Thanks, Anne. No problem.
I can jump in on that question, Alex. I think it probably did cut down on the political influence of effect on the IAC member. The representatives were probably more representative of their areas, but if I had known who else was applying to be like an IAC member from the stakeholder group, I might have thought, well, you guys don't need me. You're closer neighbors. You live here rather than just being somebody who runs an organization in the neighborhood. So I don't know if that would have been across the board a good idea, but for me, it would have been great to just meet with everybody who self-nominated to be a representative from the neighbors group. And then we could have decided who would be the best representative, which probably wouldn't have been me. Although I really, enjoyed the role and the tasks, and I'm glad I was part of it.
Appreciate that feedback.
Maybe this has already been said, and I just didn't hear it, but it would have, like, after we got chosen, if I could have gotten a list of everybody else who applied to be chosen, like an email list, I could have emailed and said, do you have any suggestions? What would you like to, what are your thoughts? As it was, I was in touch with two people that reached out to me, but I didn't know, from different schools. I mean, I reached out to my own school, but it was hard because I don't know who applied. So if I could have, had input from all those who wanted to be here, it would have given me, I think, a bigger range of ideas.
Thanks. totally fine if there aren't additional thoughts on that. That's a pretty specific question. Okay, Elena. Yeah. Also felt crunch time to reach out for input from your folks. Thanks,
I guess, sorry, I'll just jump on quickly. Alex, how were those stakeholder categories formed? Those, yeah.
Yeah, those were formed by city staff and approved by council and modified by council in that February 28th meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
With, I think, assistance from the Fair Board subcommittee, they pointed out to us.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
So, yeah.
Thank you for mentioning the Fair Board, Lynn. As the agriculture stakeholder representative, I think it would be helpful for maybe all of us, at least in this case with Ag and the Fair Board. There was a subcommittee, you just said, from the board as part of this. I didn't know which board members those were. So to provide that information ahead of time would have been helpful. So then I could communicate with those folks about information that they were gathering and people I should be talking to, because I have my own frame of reference just based on my role as an ag educator in the community. But beyond that, and with specific agribusiness and those portions of our community, their reach is farther than mine. So that would have been helpful, I think.
I think Christy was mostly the one on the IAC kind of directly liaising with them, but no, I appreciate that. That does make sense, Kim. Perfect. I'll leave another little pause in case anyone wants to add anything on that topic or general deltas, and also ask Lynn, do you have any specific questions you want to pose to the group as we're paused? If not, I have one.
I do have a question, actually. So I think the panel, of course, this is a broad generalization across 36 people, but my perception is that they found the menu that you put together really useful. And certainly, I think it works better than the menus that we have had before in the why you felt that person was important in particular. But I wonder if you all felt like the way the menu was constructed and the sort of amount of information that was there, if there's anything else about the menu or any piece of that you feel like could be done better, or if you felt like that was a pretty good, I think somebody mentioned the duplication being an issue. So we've got that for sure. And perhaps in the past, the menu has been organized actually by topic, and we didn't do that this time, and somewhat on purpose. There's lots of overlapping topics, and also wanting to not, that has a bit of a constraining effect possibly on how people look at folks on the menu, rather than just sort of this list that's ordered by what your priority order was. You could sort of look at it all together, perhaps. That's an argument, but I don't know. What are your thoughts about the way the menu was constructed, or how you constructed it?
What do you mean by menu?
That list of 100-some different potential names of speakers that you produced and was provided to the panel. And as somebody pointed out, it wasn't just names of speakers, it was also sometimes just an organization or a type of person.
I don't know if this falls into that category or not, but I definitely think you had to have time limits on speakers. But it was a bit hard in that 4 minutes or whatever it was when you had to stop for translation.
Mhm.
You know, and I think the fair and the city council only getting 10 minutes. You know, I'm not sure how much was gained in that. The feedback was that both entities did a horrible job. One of your panelists shared in an open discussion meeting that both of them did a horrible job. But my guess is when you only have 10 minutes from two of the most important stakeholders, that maybe that time can be adjusted when you're looking at the two entities that have the most to gain or lose. It might be nice to give them a little bit more time. And then I think it was the fair, if it wasn't mistaken, the city knew or had, this is my perception from what I had, they had a little bit more knowledge ahead of time because possibly Christy wasn't at the meeting, so she couldn't relay the information. So the fair had to gather theirs in much less of a time. So I don't know if that's true or not. I'm just passing on, you know, the information I had.
Thanks.
On the subject of the speaker list, I thought we might have made good use of a time to not just put forth people's names, but have more of a conversation about why we were putting forth this particular name and what this person could talk to and why that was important. It was hard to put that all in a tiny little space. And I felt like it might have been, we might have been better able to balance the topics versus the individuals if we'd had a little more conversational space in which to process that information with each other.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then on the topic, I mean, I really agree with Katie on the topic of the translation being really, really difficult, like as a stakeholder speaker. If I had known beforehand, it would have made it a little bit easier what the pace of the translation necessitated for me as a speaker.
Mhm. Yeah.
I do agree with Diane about having a discussion of why is it important that I nominated, you know, CDFA? Well, maybe 9 out of the 13 people or 14 don't have any idea who CDFA was. So I think we had one of those discussions once and it was like, okay, last plea to say why, you know, and I think we nominated Jake and it might've been you, Diane, saying, oh gosh, if I would have known, or, you know, he has my vote, but I didn't know, you know, that was important. So I completely agree with you, Diane.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask about that piece next, kind of the voting process and the deliberation space in between those votes. I know that because we kind of got set back a week, that all of that was a bit rushed. But if there, you know, if you had to kind of choose between, not saying that this is inherently a necessary trade-off, but, you know, more time for deliberation right out of the gate after making your nominations, and then just having kind of one vote versus this iterative process where you could kind of do research and, you know, then discuss and then re-vote a couple of different times. I guess, you know, which way would you go? What model makes the most sense?
I think they're both important, and I don't know that I can put one ahead of the other because you have to think of a list of people before you can explain why they're important, and then people have to have time to think about that. Or maybe a few extra sessions to allow more time for that list, or do the list in chunks, or maybe start with themes when you're making a list. I'm not sure.
No, that's helpful.
It was definitely messy, but so is democracy. So yeah, I agree with Katie that the deliberations and the iterative voting both had real strong value.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. Okay. Great. Seems like we're kind of winding down here. And I fully anticipated that this meeting might be a little shorter so we can get everyone to their Monday evenings a little bit early, unless there are other general comments that we want to wrap up with. Or Lynn, if you have any other kind of specific process questions for the group. Okay, we got a comment from Alana.
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in quickly. Yeah, but the language on the Spanish interpretation, I did hear from a couple folks that that they did not feel heard, and that it felt like an afterthought more so. So yeah, maybe like leading the process with that and really emphasizing that is something that we're taking into account. And doing outreach into the community, in that Spanish speaking community that really highlights that that'll be done from the beginning and done properly. Yeah, I think that would have helped get some more voices heard in this space. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Diana.
I just wonder how satisfied you two were with the way that the IAC process worked.
Oh my gosh.
Great question. Lynn, were you jumping in first? I absolutely agree. There were pieces of it that are messy, and there's a certain messiness that's inevitable in any participatory process, and definitely things that that we could have done better. I think I was really generally really pleased with how the process went. I think we could have allowed significantly more cushion time so that one meeting of kind of getting sidetracked by technical difficulties wouldn't have had that much impact on kind of the amount of deliberation we were able to do, and just attention to that iterative voting process. So yeah, but I thought this group worked really well together. I was pleased with how the lottery selection brought this group of folks together who, as many of you have reflected in the group and outside, wouldn't necessarily have been on a committee together otherwise. And I thought I thought that what was produced in terms of the quality and balance of speakers for the panel and that presenter menu were just huge, incredible resources to panelists, and they really, really appreciated the work that went into their process before they even showed up in the room. So I'm just grateful to all of you for your patience and for your flexibility and adaptability in this process. And the panelists were very grateful for all the work you put in, and it really paid off in terms of the quality of their process. So those are my quick thoughts. Lynn?
Sorry, taking a couple of notes. Yes, on your comments. Lest we forget those two. Yeah, I think, I was also, really pleased, still, lot of things to figure out in terms of the timing, the crunch, the stakeholder, so the reaching out within stakeholder groups, which was a new thing. not sort of fully formed, and you are helping us. You have helped us, I think, get a better idea of how to form that as sort of a task. But yeah, no, I think these processes, often one of their sort of core things that they most lack around the world at the moment, I think, is really good kind of pre-process information gathering. And yeah, this is one of the best that I've seen so far. I think hopefully, it's at least a start for how to sort of create a whole process in advance of the process to help to provide the panel with a really great broad selection of information, and not rely on some kind of hand-selected group to do that, whether it's hand-selected by the organizers, which we don't do, but others sometimes do, or whether it's hand-selected by some kind of convening agency. This feels so much better and so much like a foundation that we can improve upon, that is more legit than what's being done often. So including in our processes in the past. So thank you so much for really being not one of the first to do a number of these things with us, and for all your feedback today to help us improve it. And as Alex said, yeah, the response from the panel was so much better to what you provided than I think I have ever seen before in one of our processes. And so, yeah, in terms of there was the only complaints I think we got from the panel was, gosh, there's a lot of people presenting to us about a lot of different kinds of things, and we've got to figure out between all these different people what's going on, and we're thinking yeah, I mean, that is the point. That's great. So thank you for providing the panel with such a great broad selection of folks to hear from and options to choose from.
Well said. Great. Well, thank you all so much for taking another hour here with us. It's really nice to reconvene, and yeah, unless there are any other kind of parting remarks, we can close it out for today, and please stay in touch. Any closing remarks here before we fully close out? All right. Thank you all. Have a wonderful Monday evening and rest of your summer. Stay in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.